Hello. Good day, everyone. We are now in topic 1 of our basic calculus subject, and we talk about limit of a function and the limit of a function at C versus the value of the function at C. At the end of this session, you are expected to illustrate the limit of a function using table of values and the graph of function and distinguish between the limit of f of x as x approaches C and f of C. Okay. Limit. When we say limit, it refers to a point or level beyond which is something does not or may not extend or pass. It is a restriction on the size or amount of something permissible or possible. So if we are going to analyze what is limit, notice that it is quite really similar to something wherein we are going to watch a show in a certain place in which when you choose a seat, you would want to be as close to the action as possible. So for example, na ay variety show ba karon. So notice that kung gusto kang matanaw, syempre di ka dito sa paladyo, di ka magpaladyo. Kung pwede, gani, adto pa ka malingkod sa pinaka-closest seat. Okay, the more na closer ka to the stage wherein asa ang show, mas klaro ka dyo ang situation. Or klaro ni mo ang mga noun, klaro ni mo ang tanan na salida na dito. You would want to be as close to the performers as possible and have the best view of the show, as if you were in the stage yourself. Take note that you cannot actually be in the stage enjoying the participants, but you will be close enough to describe clearly what is happening in the show. This is how it is with limit of the functions, that we will consider a function of a single variable and study the behavior of the function as its variable approaches a particular value which is a constant. The variable can only take values very, very close to the constant, but it cannot equal the constant itself. However, the limit will be able to describe clearly what is happening to the function near that constant. Why we need to learn limit? What is its importance? Okay, because in life, everything talks about limitation. No? Tinood ba ni? Yes, because kung too much ra, unsa may mahitabo, hindi na pud maadyo. No? Masobraan ka ginom tubig. Sa may mahitabo, maglain atong tiyan, mga puno na mahubog. Sobrang kaon, yung suka-suka na ta. Sobrang gas gugma, na may mahitabo. Okay. And limit is the backbone of calculus. So, di ka maog limit, then failure pa din mong calculus. It is also important for derivatives, which is the basic idea of differential calculus. Okay, limits. If the values of f of c can be made as close as we like to L by taking values of x sufficiently close to A but not equal to A, then we write limit of f of x as x approaches A is equal to L, which is read as the limit of f of x as x approaches A is L, or f of x approaches L as x approaches A. That is, f of x approaches L as x approaches A. So don't forget that in that situation, f of x refers to y and x will be approaching to A. So again, y is approaching L when x is approaching A. Okay, so that is the illustration. So notice that in this case, when the x is approaching the point A, f of x also is approaching G. That means we are going to consider from left to right of A and the values above and below G. Okay? Now, so that means the limit of f of x as x approaches A is equal to G, or as f of x approaching G, x is approaching A. Okay, so let's start with this illustration. The first one is the limit of 1 plus 3x as x approaches 2. So in this case, our c is 2, the constant. So x will be approaching 2. So we are going to make a table in order to evaluate the given limit, in order to help us track of the effect that the approach of x towards 2 we will have on f of x. So of course, on the number line, x approaches 2 in 2 ways. Okay, so asa man ang x nga 2 na adinhe. So ang x mo approach at 2 na ay duha ka paagi. So we have abot na ang x na sa 2 from the right and from the left. So that is why in our table, we are going to consider first ang approaching 2 from its left. And right after that, approaching na po from the right. Okay, so in this case, we assign values of x. Notice that it was taken from the right using our table. No, it's from the left. Okay, this is 2, so that is why from the left of 2 we have 1, 1.4, 1.7, 1.9, 1.95, 1.97, and so on until we assign x to the number that is very close to number 2. And we replace all these values of x into x here. So that's why we've got the value of f of x is equal to 4 when x is 1, 5.2 when x is 1.4, 6.1 when x is 1.7, 6.7 when x is 1.9, 6.85 when x is 1.95, and so on. So in finding the values, you can use calculator, ha? Di bagool makagamit calculator. Okay, and we have also another table in which we assigned x with the values from the right of 2. So from the right na punta, so that's why we have 3, then 2.5, 2.2, 2.1, 2.03, and so on, 2.000, and so on. Nga pinaka-close na sa x which is equal to 2. So, mana po na yung assignments of the values of x. So, when x is 3, so we have 10 for f of x. When x is 2.5, then we have 8.5. 2.2, we have 7.6, and so on. So observe that as the values of x get closer and closer to 2, so what happened to the values of f of x? Ganyan din minsan may nahitabo. So it gets closer and closer to what number? Okay, it gets closer and closer to 7, right? 7. So this behavior can be shown no matter what set of values, what direction is taken in approaching 2. Okay, so kung atong tanawon ang graph, so using graphing a linear equation, so muna ang nahitabo. So when x is equal to 2 itself, so we can replace 1 plus 3 times 2. So this will give us 1 plus 6, and that is why we have 7. So when x is 1, then we have 1 here. We have 4. Okay, when x is 1, y is 4. When x is 3, 3y is 10. And when x is 2, we have 7. So notice that in this case, as x gets closer and closer to 2, from the left of 2 and from the right of 2, notice that your y is also gets closer and closer to 7, above and below 7 kung ato i-consider ang mga values sa y. Okay? Okay, let us now proceed to our next illustration, which is to evaluate the limit of x squared plus 1 as x approaches negative 1. So we start with giving values of x from the left of negative 1. So that is why atong mga values, we have negative 1.5, negative 1.2, negative 1.01, and negative 1.0001. So, ang atong pag-assign is gikan sa right to left of so gikan sa left padong sa right nga mo gets closer and closer to negative 1. So, gikan sa dako nga values padong sa gamay. So, if we are going to analyze ang mga values, it gets closer, values f of x, it gets closer and closer to 2. No? And then, so kung mag-assign na po ng values of x from the right of negative 1, so musugod kas negative 0.5, mo ng negative 0.8, then negative 0.99, negative 0.999. So notice that ang mga values na po sa f of x gets closer and closer to 2. Okay? So mao po diri sa atong illustration, if we are going to graph y equals x squared plus 1, if we are going to substitute x in the equation with negative 1, so negative 1 squared is 1. We have negative 1 squared plus 1. So negative 1 squared is 1 plus 1. That will give us the value of 2. So when x is negative 1, the value of y is 2. So as x gets closer and closer to negative 1 from the right and from the left, the value of y gets closer and closer to positive 2. Okay? So that's why we can say that the limit of x squared plus 1 as x approaches negative 1 is equal to positive 2. Okay? Next illustration is we are going to evaluate or investigate the limit of the absolute value of x as x approaches 0. So again, we are going to consider the values of x from the right of 0, no, from the left of 0, and from the right of 0. So, from the left of 0, so we consider, kamuray magbuot ani yung mga values ha. Basta from the left of 0, ano yung mong i-substitute. Ikaw rin mag-timbang diha sa mga values. And sa right pod, tsaka mo i-substitute. So, notice that the values of negative and the positive values are the same because we are talking about absolute value of x. Okay? And then, so if we are going to draw the graph, so mo na yung situation when x is 0, y is 0, and then mo na ni. When x is 1, y is 1. When x is negative 1, y is 1. So the values of when the values of x gets closer and closer to 0, notice that the value put of y gets closer and closer to 0. So that is why we can say or conclude that the limit of the absolute value of x as x approaches 0 is 0. Okay, so let us proceed to the next example, which is investigating the limit of x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1 as x approaches positive 1. So notice that the value or the constant here is 1. So take note that 1 is not in the domain of f. Why? Because it will make the denominator 0. But it is not the problem, because in evaluating a limit, remember that we only need to go very close to 1. We will not go to 1 itself. That means we are going to approach 1, meaning the value of x will be gets closer and closer to 1 but not equal to 1 itself. So what are we going to do is we are going to assign values of x from the left and from the right of 1. So we have here the values of x from the left of 1 is 1.5, 1.17, 1.003, and 1.0001. And it takes values of f of x to negative 2.5, negative 2.83, to negative 0.997, and negative 2.9999. And from the right of 1, we have these values, and mao po niya itong makitaan sa values of f of x. And kung atong himo ang table or graph, so mo niya mahitabo. So what happened? Nganong nainunana man ang nahitabo? So notice that since 1 is not in the domain, that means mo ni si Jedeway nga sa graph, this becomes hollow. So mora din hinapita ang mga domain sa x. So if we are going to consider x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1. So if we are going to factor out the numerator, ato na i-factor. So we have x and x as factors of x squared and factors of 4 nga ang sum is negative 5, so that is why we have negative 4 and negative 1. Then copy the denominator. So in this case, we can cancel out x minus 1. So what is left here is x minus 4. So if we substituted when x is 0, so notice that y is negative 4. So when x is 0, y is negative 4. Okay, when x is 2, which is from the right of 1, we have when x is 2, so 2 minus 4 is negative 2. So that is why we have here negative 2. Okay, so if we are going to analyze when x gets closer and closer to 1 from the right and from the left, so the values of y gets closer and closer to asa malapit na asa negative 3. Okay, So that's why the limit of x squared minus 5x plus 4 all over x minus 1 as x approaches 1 is equal to negative 3. Okay, next illustration. We have the limit of f of x as x approaches 4 if f of x is equal to x plus 1 when if x is less than 4. We have this one quantity x minus 4 squared plus 3 if x is greater than or equal to 4. So ang ato karong f of x is ingon ani, no? Okay. So this looks a bit different, but the logic and procedure are exactly the same. So what are we going to do is still approach to the constant, which is equal to 4 from the left and from the right. But note that we should evaluate the appropriate corresponding functional expressions. In this case, when x is approaching 4 from the left, the values from the left of 4, so from the left of 4, that means x is less than 4, right? We should substitute kane a value. And then if x is greater or equal to 4, kanina po ang imong function may imong substitute. So indeed, this is the part of the function which accepts values less than 4. So that's why muna atong assignment sa mga values from the left and from the right. So when x is 3.7 or 3.85 or 3.995, 3.999 and so on. So since these values are taken from the left of 4, no, sa left man sa 4. So therefore, ang atong basihan is carrying out kani. So we substituted 3.7 plus 1 man ang 4.7, 3.85 plus 1 man ang 4.85. But from the right of 4, so ang imo na nung is-substitute. So ang imong x adto nimo is-substitute dire. So we have 4.3. Ang imong value sa f of x is 3.09 kay 4. So it should be 4.3 minus 4 squared plus 3. So kani mo ni minus on, it's 0.3. So 0.3 squared is 0.09 plus 3. So manang equals sa 3.09. Again, pwede ta magamit ang calculator ha, to make computation easier kung paspas. Okay, so observe that the values that f of x approaches are not equal. Really equal, no? So that means when x is approaching 4, f of x from the left is approaching, as a man of it, to 5, kay 4.9999 man. When x is approaching 4 from the right, you can put the because ang inja pong values of f of x is approaching 3. Diba? Okay. So, kaya nga naman, ang imo ng tanaw ng graph sa manay nahitabo. Okay, kay ang first nimo nga value here is linear. Ang second po nimo nga equation is parabolic or parabola ang graph. So, mo nang ingunaan niyang nahitabo. So, as x gets closer and closer to 4 from the left, may end siya sa 5, which is hollow, na namang dili man is shaded, because x is equal to 4 is not in this situation. That means, wa is to say labot, dire. Di aman ang equal dire, so dire ka mag-start niya, shaded. Okay? From the right, gets closer and closer to 4, gets closer and closer to 3, etc. Okay? So, we can say that the limit of f of x as x approaches 4 does not exist. Kaya nga no, ganitong does not exist man. It is because D&E or does not exist. It's because ang iyang values as x approaches 4 from the left is not equal to the values of f of x as x approaches 4 from the right. So, dili equal kay dire closer and closer to 5, galing gets closer and closer to 3. So, makitaan po na nimo sa graph nga wa sila nag-abot. So, mura na sa uyab nga di mahitabo ang date kung wa nagkasinabot sa time. So, for example, ang budget, ang iyang hinumduman, alas 5 sila magkita sa plaza. Ang laki po, alas 3 magkita sa plaza. So, di mag-abot mo na alas 3 o alas 5. No? Mura po nas, wa po mo nagkasinabot. At the same time, nagkapareha mong time, pero wa mo nag-abot tungod kay dili maong lugar inyong naabtan. Manang doesn't exist, no? Okay. So, we need to emphasize an important fact. We do not say that the limit of f of x as x approaches 4 equals does not exist. Di na pwede mo inong kag equals ha. So, manang inyong munta dyan. Does not exist kani y equal. Huh? So, nor do we write the limit of f of x as x approaches 4 equals does not exist, because does not exist is not a value. So, in the previous example, sa kanina situation, D and E indicated that the function moves in different direction as its variable approaches C from the left and from the right. So in other cases, the limit fails to exist because it is undefined, such as the limit of 1 over x, the limit of 1 over x as x approaches 0. Diba? Undefined po siya. So, mo na nga does not exist sa gihapon. Okay? Another remark is, have you noticed the pattern in the way we have been investigating a limit? So, naman mo nabatikdan. So, we have been specifying whether x will approach a value c from the left through values less than c, or from the right, mao na ang mga values which are greater than c. So, meaning, ang kaning na dinhi mga less than, kanipod ang mga greater than. Ang nasa left, may less than. Ang nasa right, may greater than. So, this direction may be specified in the limit notation. that the limit of f of x as x approaches c by adding certain symbols. So, moingon ta og so mo na maka proceed ta sa next nato nga topic, which is all about one-sided limit. So, unsa man po ning one-sided limit, if the value of f of x can be made as close as we like to L by taking values of x sufficiently close to a but greater than a, then we write this one, the limit of f of x as x approaches a, kung dyan ay positive, diha sa babaw, no? So that means the positive sign there means x is approaching c from the right. Unang positive. From the right. So, bisan pag mga negative ang values sa A or C, ang imo din hang symbol is positive. So, bisan pag ang imong A is negative 2, unsa ang nasa right kay negative 1, no? So, negative 1, gets closer and closer to negative 2. So, bisan pag negative ang imong value sa A or C, from the right na ng plus ang meaning, ang pasabot. Okay? And then, let's read as the limit of x, f of x, as x approach A from the right is L. Dili ka mo yung A to the plus sign. Dili. So, it should be read as x approach A from the right is L. Okay? And if the values of f of x can be made as close as we like to L by taking values of x sufficiently close to A but less than A, so mga less than gani sa A, so that means limit of f of x as x approaches A from the left na po kay ang imo na pong ibutang diha above, right? Above of A is minus man, so that means from the left of A, or we can read as the limit of f of x as x approach A or approaches A from the left is L. Okay? So, munang na natin from the left o from the right. So, in other words, for our limit L to exist, the limits from the left and from the right, so from the left and from the right must be equal to L. So, dapat mag-equal gani ni ang value sa from the right and from the left. So, then we can say that the limit of the function exists. So, mahimo laman ang limit sa f of x as x approaches c does not exist or DNA whenever the limit of f of x as x approaches c from the left is not equal to the limit of f of x as x approaches c from the right. Kung dili gani equal, therefore we can say that the limit of the function does not exist. These limits f of x as limits the limit of f of x as x approaches c from the left and the limit of f of x as x approaches a from the right are also referred to as the one-sided limit since you only consider values on one side of C. Ha? So, usara gani ka ng imo ra bitong buwagon kani from the right ra ka. Mangita kag values sa f of x as x approaches a from the right. So, usara man ka side imong gi-consider. And maupod ni siya from the left. Usara pud ka values. Usara pud ka side imong gi-consider. Okay, so thus, we may say that in our first illustration, itong ganina, ito ha, sama ito, itong first itong illustration, okay, sa kaninga situation, because ang from the left, kaninga value, from the left, gets closer, as x gets closer and closer to 2, ang imo kung f of x gets closer and closer to 7, onja, ang imo po dire gets, from the left manino, and from the right na po, ang imo kong values f of x gets closer and closer to 7, so we can say that the limit of the function is 7. So, ato paning exist na Sa second pod, maugi hapon ang situation, right? Nga ang imo na pong x na gets closer and closer to negative 1 from the left of negative 1 kani, and gets closer and closer to 2, and diripod from the right of negative 1 nga gets ang imo kong value sa f of x gets closer and closer to 2 pod. So that is why ang imong limit ni exist and it is equal to positive 2. So maupod ni from the left and from the right and gets closer and closer to 0 man, so mao ang ni-exist. And kani kay may nahitabo wa man nagkapariha ang imong values from the left and from the right nga investigation as x approaches 1, wa man nagkapariha, then we can say that wa ba nagkapariha magud na di mao. So nagkapariha man, which is gets closer and closer to negative 3. That is why ning exist, which is negative 3. Ang dire wa nagkapariha. So, wa man nagkapariha ang imong from the left and from the right nga values. So, therefore, we can say that limit of f of x as x approaches 4 does not exist. Okay? Mailhan na nimo sa graph kung imong itong tanawon. Okay. So, sa imong illustration, for example, f of x is equal to the absolute value of x all over x is equal to 1 when x is greater than 0 and equal to negative 1 when x is lesser than 0. So in this case, the limit of this function is 1 as x approaches 0 from the right. So, kung from the right, again, arde ka sa kuan ka, consider ka sa greater than 0. So, from the right man, so ang answer is 1. So, mo get closer and closer to 1. Okay, and from the left of 0, mo ng negative 1. Kay mao man yung f of x nga value ni mo dire di naman ka mo substitute kay constant man nga equation. Okay? So, mao ni og imong tan-awon ang from the right mo gets closer and closer to 1 and from the left of 0 mo gets closer and closer to negative 1. So, kung one-sided imong gamiton, mo na ang value sa right side, mo po na ang value sa left side. Okay, so if values of f of x are not getting any closer to any single real number L as x approaches a, then we say that the limit of f of x as x approaches a does not exist. Similarly, the value of f of x may not get closer and closer to a single real number L as x approaches a from the right or as x approaches a from the left. In these cases, we say that the limit of f of x as x approaches a from the right does not exist, or that the limit of f of x as x approaches a from the left does not exist. So on some remarks, the two-sided limit of a function f of f exists at a if and only if both of one-sided limits exist at a and have the same value. That is, the limit of f of x as x approaches a is equal to L if and only if the limit of the function f of x as x approaches a from the left is equal to the limit of f of x as x approaches a from the right, which is equal to L. So that's why kay ganina ang limit from the left is negative 1 man, no? And then from the right pod is positive 1. So wa man nagka-equal ang duha ka limits from the right and from the left. So we can say that the limit of the absolute value of x over x as x approaches 0 does not exist. Okay? So, mo po ang mga cases sa mga does not exist, no? Ha? O ni, bisan pag halo to dere, ay wa sila nag-abot at the same point from the right and from the left, the right and from the left, from the right and from the left of a, dili sila pareha o value sa y. Kaya ang limit of f of x as x approaches a from the right is equal to 3 man, no? 3 from the right, 3 from the left pod is 1. So therefore, we can conclude that the limit of f of x as x approaches a does not exist. Maupod ni sa kaninga situation. So, do pareha, no, halo, dili halo. So, tungod kay from the left, maabot siya sa 2. From the left away, maabot from the right away, maabot sa 2. Pareha man ang right ug ang left na value sa f of x as x approaches a. Therefore, ning exist ang imong limit, which is a 2. Okay? So, what about this one? We are going to determine the following. So, the first one is limit of f of x as x approaches a from the as x approaches negative 3. So, as mga negative 3 sa x. Ano 1, 2, 3. Kani. So, unsa may values diha. So, the limit from the right is from the right of negative 3, limit of f of x as x approaches negative 3 from the right. So, pila may values from the right. So, 1. Ba? 1 imong y. From the left pod, nagyapon hinaabot sa 1 gihapon. Ang limit pod sa f of x as x approaches negative 3 from the left is also equal to 1. So, since pareha man, therefore, ang atong answer is 1. Diba? Ang limit sa f of x as x approaches negative 3 is equal to 1. Okay? Second one, from the limit of f of x as x approaches negative 1. From the left, negative 1. Galingan hinaw. From the left is niabot sa 1. And from the right, niabot ba sa 3. Diba? So, ang imong limit of f of x as x approaches negative 1 from the right is equal to 3. And then, ang imong limit of f of x as x approaches negative 1 from the left is, from the left of negative 1 is 1. So, since nagka-equal sila duha, so we can say that the limit of f of x as x approaches negative 1, no, di na mo equal, does not exist. Okay, or D in E. No. Okay, so C, from the right of 1, from the right of 1 is negative 1, and from the left of 1 is negative 1 pod. So, ang answer, ang limit of f of x as x approaches 1 is negative 1. Okay, so D, limit of f of x as x approaches 3, as on 3. Kani. So, from the right, niabot sa 0. From the left po, niabot sa 3. 3 of 0. So, since dili man equal, therefore, the limit of the function f of x as x approaches 3 is, or does not exist. Dili na is. The limit does not exist. Okay, letter E. 5. So, 5 is here. From the right of 5, moabot diri sa 5 pod. Then, from the left of 5, moabot po siya sa 5 gihapon. So, nag-abot sila sa the same point. Therefore, the limit of f of x as x approaches 5 is equal to 5. Okay? Saan na ba? Okay. So, kani. So, atong i-consider ang graph. So, limit of negative 1.5. So, negative 1.5 is here. Kani. Anong gusto kani? Kani. So, from the left of negative 1.5, abot siya sa, from the right is 2.5, and from the left is of negative 1.5, okay? Abot rapod siya sa 2.5. So, therefore, ang answer ni is 2.5. Right? And the limit of f of x as x approaches 0. So, 0 from the right and 0 from the left. So, from the right, padong siya sa 0. And from the left, padong siya sa 1. So, since nag-equal ang right o ang left, therefore, we can say that the limit of the function as x approaches 0 does not exist. Letter C, the limit of f of x as x approaches 2. So, 2. From the right, maabot po siya sa 0. From the left, maabot po siya sa 0. So, that's why the limit of f of x as x approaches 2 is equal to 0. And lastly, in this given example, the limit of f of x as x approaches 4. Dili ang 4. So, from the left of 4, niabot sa 0. 0 ang y. From the right po sa 4, naapod sa negative 2 ang y. So, 0 o 2 man ang value sa y, wa nagkapareha. Therefore, the value of the limit of the function f of x as x approaches 4, it does not exist. Okay? So, let's proceed now to the second topic. Ato na lang ni ipuno kay mas mubo raman ni the limit of a function at a at c versus the value of the function c. So, what is their relationship? Kadtong nag-evaluate ka sa limit of a function at c versus f of c, kanang imo ra i-evaluate that dyan. So, what is their relationship? Are they related to each other? Okay, so if we are going to consider the limit of 1 plus 3x as x approaches 2, so notice that imo mang i-substitute from the left and from the right. So, as x gets closer and closer to 2 from the right, ang value is 1 plus 3 times 2. So, mahimo ni siyang 7. Diba? From the right of 7, from the right of 2 is 7 man, and from the left of 2 is 7 pod. Maotong, this is the first illustration ganina. Pero, imo pong i-evaluate po dadyon without the limit. When we say evaluation of the function c, so ang imo buhatan i-substitute naman sa mora ni 7 pod. So, man ang makaingon tang related sila. Pero, actually, they are not the same. So, therefore, we can consider that the limit of the function at c and the value of the function c are different to each other. So, dili din sila magkapareha. Kaya nga naman, ang katong mag-evaluate ka sa function mo, diretso na mag-substitute. Whereas, ang limit of the function at c, kaya mo mang i-consider ang mga values from the right and from the left of c. Okay? So, that's all for lesson 1 and 2 of topic 1 in our basic calculus nga subject. So, I hope excited pa mo sa uban pang mga topics for topics 1 and 2. Okay? So, daw tag-as ang atong discussion kay ugaho ra pong i-shorten. I know nga dili na jud ninyo masabtan. So, at least malamang what is in your kanang file nga copy nga akong gi-distribute almost everything nga na discuss na mo ng taas-taas po datong time. Okay, so kapod dyan magani putol-putulon laman ninyo og tan-aw ang atong video. Okay, so para sa tanan ang makahibaw, I am using instead of using the module, I am using the basic calculus nga learners module sa senior high school. Pwede na ninyo ma-download anywhere. Just search sa web kantong learners module or learners material in basic calculus. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much and God bless. Bye.